I've had the opportunity to do hundreds of radio programs and thousands of interviews and conversations, but this truly is one of the finest I've ever had the opportunity to do. It truly is a conversation that counts. Greetings once again, ladies and gentlemen. You are in tune, you are in touch with the program in which we talk to people who are trying to transform good things. Not transform things into bad things, we got enough of those, but people who are trying to bring transformations into our lives. And right now, I'm reading a paper. I'm looking at it, and I'm going to read the title to you. Here we go. See if I get it right. Genetic associations with an amyotrophic lateral sclerosis reversal phenotype. Dr. Richard Bedlack, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Well, I know three of those words, genetic associations and reversal. Obviously, this is a paper written for people like you who are smart and trying to make good things happen in medicine. So tell me your story to our many listeners and what this transformational paper and project might be all about. As we say in radio, you're on.
Well, thank you so much. So I'm a neurologist. I specialize in a disease called ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's a terrible disease. It's a neurodegenerative disease that specifically takes out something called motor neurons. Motor neurons are kind of like wires that connect the front of your brain where you decide to do stuff to your muscles that carry out your actions. And as those cells gradually die, people with ALS lose the ability to control their muscles. They lose the ability to walk, feed themselves, dress themselves, eventually speak, swallow, and breathe. I think the best description I've ever heard came from a patient. She said, ever since I got this disease, I feel like I'm in a box. And every day it gets a little bit smaller on all sides, further restricting what I can do. And I know one day it's going to get so small and tight that it's going to suffocate me. And I still get the goosebumps even after all these years, repeating those words from that patient.
So I get the goosebumps hearing it.
Yeah. I mean, I saw my first patient with this disease all the way back in 1997.
By the way, can I help you? For some of you, this is sometimes known by a famous baseball player, right?
Yeah. Lou Gehrig
go there
disease.
and then bring up.
Yeah. I mean, prior to 2014, I would say most people had not heard of ALS when I would tell them that's what they had. They would know it as Lou Gehrig's disease, and that's because in the late 1930s, probably the most famous athlete in the world, Lou Gehrig, was struck down in the prime of his career by this disease. But it was actually described long before Lou Gehrig in the late 1860s by a French neurologist named Charcot. Okay. What happened in 2014 is the Ice Bucket Challenge. We're actually 10 years from the Ice Bucket Challenge, and some of us are doing it again this month. But in the Ice Bucket Challenge, not only did it raise a lot of money for ALS, but it also raised a lot of awareness. And that's when people started to really kind of understand that it was around for a long time before Lou Gehrig, and they came to really now most people know it as ALS.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So Stan, I was saying I saw my first patient with this in the late 90s when I was still in residency. And, I thought it was the most amazing story, the most incredible collection of exam findings that had ever come across. And I remember how I felt when my attending came in and said, this is what it is. You're going to experience rapidly progressive disability. Your life is going to be very short. We don't have anything to do for this. You should go home and get your affairs in order. And then he walked out. And I remember driving home just stunned, like, wow, there's got to be some better way to do this than that. And so I decided day that I would, decided I'd stay at Duke and try to change the system, try to build a clinic that would give people some options and a research program that would give them some hope. And so flash forward all these years, one of the things I decided to research was what I call alternative and off-label treatments. Now, you might ask, well, why in the world did you go there? I went there because my patients were there. Like, I noticed the first few years of my career that patients were coming in and they'd have bags of stuff that they bought on the internet. And for the most part, this stuff was not even being recorded. The nurses were only recording the prescription medicines. This stuff was just sitting off to the side. And I remember one day asking, well, what is all this stuff? And they laid it all out and they said, yeah, we bought this stuff. We read about it online and we didn't think you'd be interested. So we just, we keep it over here. We don't talk about it. And I said, well, if you're interested, I'm interested. So let's talk about it. Let's try to figure out, which of these things might make sense and which probably don't. And I recognized that this was happening all over the world and that many doctors were not interested in working with patients to try to make more informed decisions about this group of products. So I started something called ALS Untangled. I call it the X-Files of ALS. People anywhere in the world can send me a message. Hey, I read about this thing, put it on your list. We have a website. There's this page on the website called Future Reviews. You send me an idea, I'll post it on that page, and we let the world vote. And if that idea gets enough votes, then I assign it to one of my team members, and we write a review. And the reviews take about 40 hours. We have a very specific structure that we use to try to keep these objective. But the goal of this whole program is just to help patients and families make more informed decisions about this group of products. So it was in the midst of one of these ALS Untangled reviews, one on energy healing back in 2011, that I came across my first case of what I call ALS reversal. So somebody said,
what a wonderful term.
Well, yeah, it sounds awesome.
Because let me just part of the story is I met Dr. Bedlack at one of the best Rotary meetings I've ever been to. And in effect, I had just had a friend who had died 8 weeks ago of ALS. And one of our best friends in Arizona, they discovered 2 years ago that their daughter, who had obviously two of their grandchildren, had contacted ALS. So I was right into your conversation, but that's part of why I love hearing from you.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, even by 2011, I had been practicing for a decade. It was clear to me that what I heard from that attending so many years ago was not correct. There's a lot of variability with this disease, and I think it's so important when people get the diagnosis to help them to understand that. Like, yeah, it's a tough disease. It is often disabling and life-shortening, but how quickly all that happens is wildly different. I mean, look at Stephen Hawking. I mean, if you know his story, here's a guy who was 20 years old. And somebody sat him down and said, young man, you've got 2 years to live. Go get your affairs in order. And thank God he didn't listen. He went on and had one of the most incredible lives ever recorded in human history. And he taught us so much about the universe. He lived more than 50 years from his ALS diagnosis. So it's clear that there can be a lot of variability. But what was never clear to me until 2011 is that people can actually recover from this disease. So this is when I came across this website, this Energy Healers website, and there was a video on there about a person named Nelda Boos, who said she had been diagnosed with ALS at University of Virginia, said she had progressed very quickly over the course of a year, completely lost all strength in her arms and legs, was short of breath, was told there's really nothing more we can do. It's time for hospice. She was picking out her outfit to be buried in. And then she went to see the energy healer, and slowly but surely she recovered. She recovered completely, and she's still completely recovered. And that all happened 30 years ago. So, of course, I thought, I can't believe everything you see on the internet. This is too good to be true. Well, I found Nelda Boos and I talked to her, and she verified what was in that video. And even better, she sent me a box of her medical records. And I was stunned when I went through those, because clearly she did meet published criteria for an ALS diagnosis. Clearly she did objectively progress to where she was paralyzed and near death. And now it appears that she's completely recovered. So I'd never seen anything like this before, Stan, and I didn't quite know what to do with this. So first I reached out to the energy healer and I said, I don't understand what it is that you're doing. I don't understand the mechanism by which it could heal someone from a neurodegenerative disease, but I do believe this person has recovered from ALS. And so would you allow me to study what you're doing? Would you allow me to do a clinical trial of energy healing? And I'll raise the money and I'll, send you some of my patients and we'll see if you can make anyone else better. And his response to me was priceless. It was, Richard, for those who believe, no proof is necessary. And for those who don't, no proof will ever be enough. And so that was the end of my attempts to study this energy healer. But what also happened is I started to ask my ALS Untangled team members, some of whom had been around much longer than me, have you ever seen anything like this? And many of them said, I did see one patient like that I really thought had ALS. They progressed for a while, then they recovered. And I didn't know what it was. I thought I must have made a mistake. And I said, go about your business, have a good life. And I discharged them from clinic and I don't know where they are now. And so then I started to pore over the literature and I realized, holy cow, people have been describing single or in some cases a few cases like this all the way back to the 1960s. And yet no one has ever previously tried to put all these cases together and study them.
That's amazing.
And I was like, this is like a tremendous missed opportunity. We've got to try to put these people into a database and see if there's something we can identify that they have in common. Because if we could understand why these people recovered, maybe we could make that happen more often. And, Stan, there's a precedent for this. It sounds far-fetched, but in the HIV world, there's a group of people that are called elite controllers, and we've known about them since the 1980s. They get infected with HIV. We can measure it in their blood, but they never get sick. They never get AIDS, and many of them never take any medicine. And again, for a long time, people just shrugged their shoulders, and then somebody said, well, let's study them. Put them in a database, get samples on them. And it turns out that a lot of these HIV elite controllers have a genetic mutation that's very unusual. And it's in a gene which is called CCR5. And so immediately when that paper was published, scientists honed in on what is this? What does this gene do? It turns out it codes for a protein in the surface of cells that HIV needed to get inside the cells and make people sick. And so because of their mutation, this group of elite controllers, they were resistant to HIV getting into their cells. And once we understood that, Pfizer, a big drug company, jumped on this and made a drug called Maraviroc that blocks that receptor, and it helps everyone with HIV. And it's, part of the story as to why HIV has become a more livable disease now. And so I said, well, there's already a precedent, so let's look. And so I've been looking for more than a decade now at these ALS reversals, collecting them, trying to get as much information on them as I can. What do they take? What other kinds of medical problems do they have? What kind of environmental exposures have they had? What do their genes look like compared to people with ALS who don't get better? And so, long story short, up until that paper came out, I hadn't found much that was different about them. They were similar in terms of their, average age and sex distribution, racial distribution, how they change with their ALS before they start to recover, what other kinds of medical problems they had, what kinds of things they take, what kinds of environmental exposures they had, what their microbiome looked like. It was all pretty similar to people with ALS who didn't recover. And then we studied their genes. And that's where we had this, what I think, very exciting finding. So these folks, about a third of them, have a mutation in a gene which we hardly ever see in racially matched controls, people with ALS who don't get better. It's in a gene that controls the expression of a protein, which is called insulin-like growth factor binding protein 7, or IGF-BP7. Now, this particular gene, this particular protein, has never before been implicated in any way, shape, or form in ALS. But there's a theory by which manipulation of this protein could explain how someone could recover from ALS. And so we think that the mutation we found results in much lower levels of this protein. Now, what does this protein normally do? Well, Stan, it has hundreds of functions. but one that we are excited about is that it gets in the way of the interaction between a growth factor called insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1, and its receptors, which are found in many places, including motor neurons, the very cell that is dying in people with ALS. And so we think that with less of this protein, there can be a stronger interaction between that growth factor and motor neurons. In other words, we think that your motor neurons could be more resistant to ALS, and that if you get it, you get a milder case that you might be able to recover from. So that's the explanation of what we found and why we're so excited about it.
This is really exciting. And I said, I went up to you right away and just simply said, we've got to talk about this because, and I remember just one of the memories of my childhood, which goes back a number of years. I still remember we lived in this little town up northwest North Dakota, and one day the bad word came to this little village, about 400 or 500 people, that one of the major residents of the community, who everybody loved, he was wonderful, he was the one person who owned a grocery store that supplies everybody, but he wasn't feeling very good, and so he went to Minot, which was 80 miles away, and they said, well, we think this is pretty bad. So they sent him, of course, to Mayo in Rochester, Minnesota, and the word came back that he had cancer. And I remember the day, about 2 or 3 days later, when the whole town was there to greet him as he came in on the Great Northern Railroad to greet him, because all of us knew that our good friend Alvin was going to die because he had cancer. It was a death sentence. But now, ALS, it seems, could have been, but maybe it won't be. Is that right?
Well, Stan, I mean, that's my hope. I think it's a little bit early to know if that's what this means. But, what we're doing right now as we speak is we're looking for a relationship between the amount of this IGF-BP7 and how fast people with typically progressive ALS are changing in a very large database that is housed at a group called ALS TDI in Cambridge, Mass. Because if my theory is right, then there should be a relationship in a much larger group of patients, right? So, again, I told you in the beginning, I mean, why is it that some people change so quickly and others so slowly? Nobody knows. But what if it has to do with IGF-BP7? What if the less of this you have, the better you do? And if you have only a fraction of what a normal person has, then you can actually recover from the disease. And so we'll have the answer to that probably by the end of August. We're about 2 weeks away from the end of August, and we think we'll have the answer. But if there is a relationship, then that's an independent piece of information that tells me I'm on the right track. And I will be launching a trial to try to knock this protein down as much as I can. And we'll see what happens. I mean, again, my dream is that knocking it down enough will reverse ALS in everyone. And then I can retire and go into my second love, which is designing clothing.
And by the way, he is a wonderful clothes designer too.
Well, I'm a good dresser.
That's right.
I try to put on really bright, fun things. That's because, right. Until the day comes when I could stop or reverse ALS, I think it's really important that I try to create a lot of hope in my patients and families. And I feel like walking in the room with something bright and colorful is a good start.
As one of my mentor friends said, don't blend in, stand out. Well, Dr. Richard, I know right now the people I'm going to specifically share this with, and I know hopefully it will really go viral in many ways, but would you be open to people contacting you with either requests or stories or whatever?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, Stan, the only reason that I'm here in this particular unusual place in my career is because I've been open to listening to colleagues, listening to patients and families, listening to people in entirely different disciplines about their ideas. And, I mean, 99.9% of them have unfortunately not panned out. But in the words of Thomas Edison, I don't feel like I have failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work.
Well, I've lived by that expression myself.
Yeah. So maybe this is the path, and I wouldn't have gotten anywhere if I hadn't listened to someone who said, "Hey, check out this Energy Healers website." I think a lot of people would have dismissed that suggestion as quackery, and instead I said, "Well, look, I don't know how to fix ALS yet. So let me keep an open mind. Let me look at this. Let me see if it goes anywhere." And, I still don't know about energy healing, but I do know now that there's a fair number of people, 61, that have had ALS and recovered from it. And I might be on the cusp of understanding why that happens, and hopefully someday being able to make it happen more often.
I would hope that it would happen in my lifetime, just because that would be so wonderful. Hey, is there a place they could reach you? Are you okay with that if somebody wants to do that?
Yeah, I'll share my email with you. It's my name, richard.bedlack@duke.edu.
At Duke EDU. Obviously, we're right here in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. And so this has been a wonderful experience. Doctor, as I said, I've been to a lot of meetings. I've been to a lot of Rotary meetings, but as I went up and told you, and then I told the person who invited you, Julie, I said, I think this is the best meeting I've ever been to. And you've even made it more so. So I am so grateful.
Well, thank you, Stan. That's a great compliment. And thank you for giving me some time to tell my story today.
You did wonderfully so. So all the best and blessings to you and your colleagues, and that the inspirited inspiration will come to you in great measure, and that more and more people will live better, longer, because of the good work you do. Thank you, Doctor, so much.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you.